Tell me when you're doing it, though. Don't just put us. Welcome everyone to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. So I'm Christy Stratus, historical fantasy and historical suspense author, all books taking place in the Victorian era. And my awesome co-host here tonight is David M. Kelly, who writes all things sci-fi. And you'll notice that Richard is missing. So he may or may not pop in at some point. It's really just that he's in an area that does not have great Wi-Fi. So we'll see if he comes in, and if not, then we'll certainly miss him. So Looking for Legends is an interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guest tonight or comment on what you're hearing in the show. So tonight we're excited to be chatting with Gregory Erich Phillips. Welcome, Gregory. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Christy.
Hi,
so glad to be here.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started. I know you're from a literary family, just tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So I'm an author, obviously, and I just had my third novel come out last year. It's called A Season in Lights. Here it is. We'll get into that a little bit more later, I'm sure. And I've been writing pretty much since I was really a young boy. I wrote my first novel when I was 14. I've just always been fascinated by literature and storytelling, really. And so I'm very excited to have a few of my novels finally to have gotten some traction after many years. And yeah, it's just been an exciting time.
Yeah. And I think every one of your novels has also won an award. Well, multiple, I think, but at least one, which is really something to say, especially for debut books. That is really something.
For me, the awards really were a point of validation for me, because as any newish author will tell you, it can be very discouraging just navigating the whole publishing industry and readers and not knowing if your works are going to be well received. So having won an award for each of my novels, at least one, again, it was very validating and really just told me that, yes, these books are worthy to be out in the world. And it encouraged me to be more proactive with pushing my word out, to the public.
Sure.
I think that's a very valid point, Gregory. I mean, as authors, we very much tend to work on our own, and kind of like in little dusty back corners often, and don't even see the light of day sometimes. Is that your dog, Christy?
That's actually my cat. It sounds like a dog, but he seems to have eaten something he doesn't quite like so much, so he's making some noise. Whenever anybody comes over, he runs and hides. But when I'm on something like this, he wants to be seen and heard. You might see him walking on my chair behind me later.
Okay. But yeah, as I said, we tend to work in very insular spaces. So, kind of having some idea of validation, it can be very challenging for authors, at any stage in their careers.
Absolutely. It is a lonely experience being a writer. As you two are both writers, you probably know that. It's you do spend so much time on your own and almost in your own echo chamber of thoughts. So getting that outside validation is very necessary, but it's also something you can't just go and seek. It has to come from a real source. It has to be authentic. And for me, when I was starting out, that was one of the main challenges. And for that reason, I often didn't like talking about the fact that I was a writer before I got published. I kept it kind of, as, not secret, but private. And it was getting that validation of some awards, finally getting my first novel published, that made me confident enough to say, yes, I'm a writer. This is part of my identity.
Yeah, I think Robert Heinlein said that writing was something that should be done in private and you should wash your hands afterwards.
Yeah.
I like that. So let's talk about your latest release then, A Season of
Mhm.
Lights. Tell us all about it. Tell us what it's about and everything.
Sure. So, A Season in Lights is a story of passion, ambition, and escape set in the colorful artistic underworld off Broadway in New York City. And the the idea came because there's a lot written and movies done about people making it big on Broadway. And I wanted to tell the story of people who don't necessarily make it to the big stage. People who are just, dancers, musicians who are just hustling to make a living. And and to give a sort of a glimpse to that backstage underworld that, the general public doesn't always see. And I have a little bit of that in my background. I'm a dancer and a musician. I did live in New York City for about a year and a half and danced in a few off Broadway shows. Have done some small theater productions here in Seattle, where I live. So I wanted to bring all of that knowledge into this novel. And and part of the theme of the novel is then that the fulfillment for these artists comes in the journey, not in the big stage performance. That the fulfillment is along the way, which is how I've felt both as a dancer but also as an author. Your art is worthy on its own. You don't have to become a big star. So that was kind of the theme that started the novel. But then the novel changed course fairly dramatically in early 2020. I'd already had a completed draft. I'd done some preliminary exploration into getting it published, but I'm very glad I didn't yet. And then when the pandemic started, I thought, wow, I want to show how, the shutdown of all of the arts, how it affected not only economically but psychologically and in terms of their identity, artists, people who this is their whole lives. I know people who personally here in Seattle whose careers were ended by this, ballet dancers who maybe had 1 or 2 years left of their career and retired as the pandemic hit, or people who never got that chance because of it. And so it was a unique opportunity that I had this fully written novel that I was able to write a new ending and really a new final third of the book, and show what was happening really at the exact present moment I was writing it to these artists in New York City and around the world.
That's a pretty unique opportunity. And I know that you actually also include, maybe as a backdrop or however you do it, AIDS also in the 80s, I believe it was.
Yes.
And so you kind of have those two things just juxtaposed,
Yeah.
which is very, very interesting. Did you find it difficult now that you have this complete draft? One of the difficult things many writers find is you have a totally complete draft ready to send off, and now you have to do all this changing and editing. Did you find it tricky, especially dealing with two things like, that are so important?
Great question. And the short answer is no. But the long answer is the portion that dealt with AIDS had already been written. So it was in no way an intentional parallel between AIDS and COVID. It was an organic thing that developed. I've Having known many people who were living in New York City, as well as in San Francisco and Seattle, and working in the ballet community during the 1980s, dealing with the AIDS outbreak. It was something that was just on my heart to write about. But I wrote that section several years earlier. And the fact that it ended up sort of paralleling COVID in the story was just an organic thing that happened. And as far as pivoting, I didn't do a lot of editing of the earlier section, because the fact that I had written it before any of us knew before COVID even existed, leaving it as it was, I think gave it a more authentic feel. So then the final third, when the COVID outbreak happens, it's a shock to the characters, just like it's a shock to all of us. And I wanted to preserve that, to not give foreshadowings to that this thing is going to happen, to just have it be a sudden jolt, just as February and March of 2020 were to all of us.
Yeah, that is, I'm sure, very impactful in the way it reads. As you said, it's the same as it was for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I noticed for the launch of A Season in Lights, you were featured on around 50 book blogs, something like that.
Yeah.
And you were also on the cover of Publishers Weekly, which is a huge achievement.
Oh, that was fantastic. Yeah.
What's the secret? Please tell us.
Publishers Weekly, my publisher, helped to make that happen, which I'm super grateful for. And many of the blogs too. My publisher has been extremely supportive. Lucid House Publishing out of Atlanta. They've been just a fantastic partner. I've also, some of it is, on my own, just kind of reaching out to blogs and podcasts. I'll also give a shout out to my publicist, Creative Edge Publicity. They've been fantastic, and they, helped me connect with the two of you. And so it's been a collaborative thing between, my own work, my publisher, and my publicist. And I think having that team behind you is huge. It's, again, back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Sometimes being a writer feels lonely. You can get discouraged. And so having a support team, both with marketing, publicity, and also with your publisher, who believe in your work, number one, and then are, doing things to help you promote it. It's invaluable.
You're right. And we have a comment here from Hillary. It says, I think we heard so much during COVID about how tourism and hospitality was suffering, and perhaps less about the arts. So I think it's great that you chose to focus on that community.
Yeah. Thank you, Hillary.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's something you don't, if you're not in it, you don't always think about it, because arts seems like a luxury that we go to a show or a play or, a concert, just for fun. But this is careers for these people, and not only careers, but identity too. That was one thing I really wanted to show in this book, is that losing that is a loss, not only of a career, but of an identity.
Yeah. What a great point. CJ. Go ahead.
So CJ says, I love that you acknowledge the impact of a team effort. And I think this is something that all of us as authors kind of like feel, because it may all look as though it's just kind of like, us on our own doing all of this stuff, but it never is. There's always a whole bunch of people helping us out, keeping us going, editors, artists for covers, our family and friends who support us and what have you. And it really is very much, a team effort. It just looks kind of solitary from the outside.
Yeah. No successful author is ever alone.
Yeah.
Very true.
To go back to the what you were saying about your book in the beginning, that it's really around somebody who's, has a career in dancing, but maybe is not the star and is more, on the side. And as you said, many times, like we've seen many movies and things like that made about the main star. I was thinking how even back in probably the 1930s, for sure, I know, because I watch a lot of old movies, maybe even before that, there has always been a fascination with looking at the life of a big star and seeing how it works, whether it's a dancer or mainly actresses, that I've noticed. But it is so true that when you look at, for example, even in real life, extras. Like you look into their history, which most people don't do.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, and sometimes it's even more fascinating than the main event. You
Yeah.
know, it can be more
Mm.
fascinating. So it just, you know, what you're saying, basing your book on someone who is not the main star, actually
Yeah.
sounds more interesting to me.
I agree. And, you know, and there's two primary characters. There's the female dancer who is a little bit past the point where she should be taking this chance. She's in her early to mid 30s, auditioning against girls who are, you know, 17, 18 for these dance parts, and just feeling, and she has this history already. And I agree, it makes her a more interesting character. She's got demons, family drama, things that, you know, are not making it clean for her to take this chance in New York City. And then the other character, which is an older man who's a pianist, and he's in his 50s when we encounter him. And in contrast, he had his big breakthrough when he was in his early 20s. I can't remember his exact age. And then it never happened again. And that's another side of this story of the artists that happens, that you have this big moment that you never fully appreciate because you assume that it's the start of something.
Yeah.
And for him, for Tom in the story, it became the highlight of his career. And he looks back in his 50s and thinks, wow, I never would have imagined that it never happened again.
Yeah.
So it's a little
It's
poignant.
it is, you know, you speaking about it just makes me sort of chills, you know, the kind of thing when
Mhm.
it's hard to appreciate what you have in the moment
Yeah.
that you have it. And as you say, you do assume you're gonna continue to
Mhm.
skyrocket, but that's painful on
Yeah.
the end.
So just
Oh, sorry.
so, go ahead.
No, David and I are like right on top of this together. CJ says, "This sounds like something I'd like to read. Where can I find your work?"
So my website is scrolling right below. Make sure you spell my middle name with the Erich. So if you go there, it has links to buy the book. You can also buy it on Amazon, or, you know, your favorite bookstore. You know, I always encourage you to support your local independent bookstores. Again, the title is A Season in Lights. So yeah, there you have it.
Fantastic.
So just moving on to one of your other novels, you wrote Love of Finished Years, which
Yes.
is set against the backdrop of World War One.
Mm-hmm.
Could you can talk a little bit about why you decided to set it during that time period, and perhaps some of the research you had to do for that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been writing novels since I was 14. So, which is about 30 years ago. So, and I've kind of written a combination in my early years between contemporary fiction and some historical. I love history. I've always thought of myself more of a contemporary fiction writer, but it turned, the Love of Finished Years was my debut novel, and it was the one that really kind of launched my career. And so I think at some point I will go back to historical, because it was fairly successful, and it was a great experience. As far as the research and why I chose that era, I've I've always been very fascinated with World War One, and a student of it since for many years before I wrote that novel. I feel like, similarly to how in Broadway we see all these um, renditions of the big stars, and who make it big, but we don't see the underlying, the people who are just hustling. And I'm always fascinated by, okay, what's the other story? And in books and movies, ever since I was a young boy, there's so much done on World War II. And so my brain started thinking, what's the other story? What's the backstory here? And that led me to World War One. And I found it to be just such a fascinating event in world history. And I became a student of it. I studied it. I researched it. And from all of that, then came the idea of, oh, I want to write a novel that touches on this world event. And then more so wanted to write a novel that touches on the early 20th century immigrant experience. And I decided to make the immigrant family German so that there was an extra layer um, of intrigue and complication and racism that happened once the war broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And the immigrant experience is something that is very close to my heart, mainly because of some, people that I know who have faced this. And so that's something I delved into both in Love of Finished Years, as well as in my second novel, The Exile, which follows a Colombian American family in, close to present day America and their experience of racism, the threat of deportation, and so forth. So that was sort of the twofold inspiration behind Love of Finished Years. And then that novel ended up being the first one that won an award, and it won an award before it was published as a manuscript. And that is really what ended up sort of launching my career.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could win an award before you published.
Well, if you just submit it, who's going to say no?
I guess so.
Yeah, that's what I did.
And you mentioned your other book.
Mm-hmm.
Please let me know if I got this wrong. I believe it's called Exile. The Exile.
The Exile, yes.
The Exile. And this also takes place during a major time in history. It's the financial crash, right? About in 2008.
Yeah.
So you have, feel free to tell us all about it, of course, but maybe you should do that first, actually. Tell us a little bit about The Exile, because my question kind of goes between them.
Yeah. So yes, The Exile, as you mentioned, it takes place during the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. It follows a Colombian American woman and her extended family who, and it also goes back to the 1980s, similarly to the way A Season in Lights does, to portray her and her father's time of fleeing Colombia during a period of some political and drug violence and so forth. And that one's sort of twofold, the themes both being about the immigrant experience, and as I mentioned before, that's something close to my heart, where I wanted to portray just the way that feels to have the threat of deportation hanging over you, and to hopefully foster empathy in readers who may not know people directly. And then the financial crisis is an interesting thing I wanted to tackle, because I actually do my day job is I work in the mortgage business. So I have I was there during that time. I saw how that all unfolded, and you'll notice a theme in me and my my writings that I want to tell the story of the people kind of underneath what you see. There was a lot written about the financial crisis, movies and so forth, about the big Wall Street bankers, similarly to the big Broadway stars. I wanted to show the experience of the low-level mortgage loan officers just hustling to make a living on the street. And so that's what I did in The Exile. That's where I set a lot of the drama, was in just a shady mortgage office that these people are just trying to scrape by. And so it was fun to write, because I put a lot of my own experiences into it, just things I've seen in the business. But it also gave a good backdrop for the protagonist being Latin American, who knows that her very success is tied to her ability to stay in this country.
So I noticed that in all three of your books, there is like a major historical context. The time period is extremely important, and something major happens during it that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So we have, the 2008 financial crisis. We have COVID. We have, the big AIDS scare in the 80s. And, your other book also had World War I involved in it. So, is there like a particular reason that you always do that? Is it because like it's pointed to the characters, it brings out something from the characters? You love doing that, or what is the reason behind that?
Great question. And in some ways, even though two of my three novels are contemporary, I consider myself somewhat of a historical novelist, even when I'm writing contemporary fiction, because it, like you noticed, it ties in with world events. And for me, that's just part of the fascination of writing, and what inspires me is to tie these characters into what's happening, because these events so affect all of us. We're all marked by them. In the latest example, the COVID pandemic is going to be a defining event for our generation, for everyone who lived through it. It may be the defining event for many of us. And so and I think that fiction is one of the beautiful things about fiction is it gives an opportunity to unpack and deal with these world-changing events in ways that other mediums can't. So then the financial crisis, that was, for many, it wasn't like COVID that it affected everybody, but it affected many of us. And so to deal with it in that way, I think just people will relate to it, as well as to, just to deal with the immigrant experience in the United States in recent times is another huge life-changing event for many people, both who have experienced it and who've known people who've experienced it. So that, as far as why I do it, I don't really think in advance about it, but that's what inspires me to write a story, to craft a story, is there's this thing in the world that happened or that is happening that I want to put a character into it and then see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. CJ says, it's so inspiring to hear your story, Gregory. What is your writing process? Do you plot, or are you a discovery writer?
Discovery writer all the way. It's so I hadn't intended to discuss this piece, but here we are. I recently started a new novel. I wrote the first chapter. I have no idea where it's going to go after the first chapter. No idea. Usually I plot about the first third of the book and then have a very loose idea of what's going to happen after that. But the thing is, once you create a character, they take the story where they're going to take it, and they take on a life of their own, and they make bad decisions, and you have to allow them to make bad decisions and then follow them into whatever murky waters they went into, and you don't always know how you're going to get them out. So it's, people sometimes ask, okay, do you create the character first or the plot first? For me, I create the situation first. And once you create the situation and then put a character into it, then you don't know where the plot's going to go.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Such a good point.
So, just talking about your writing in general, you on your site, your work is described as literary fiction. Could you just maybe talk a little bit about that to explain what that is to maybe people who don't necessarily know the term?
Sure. And it's a term that I reluctantly embrace because there's not really a better term for my books. They're not genre fiction. I mean, the one historical one, of course, is historical, but it's they're not romance. They're not all of those categories. So literary fiction is kind of the closest term. And I say I reluctantly embrace it because oftentimes when people hear literary, it sounds very heady and like it's going to be very wordy, which is not my writing style at all. My writing style is very crisp, it's a fast read. People often read my books in 2 days. I don't know how they do that, but some people can read fast, I guess. So I've also often been described within the category of women's fiction or book club fiction. So I think that it's very accessible, but literary is still probably the best term for it because it does deal with big topics, big issues. It's not. I like to write so that it can feel like easy, light reading, but the subject matter is not easy and light. It's going to make the readers think. So that to me is kind of the gist of why I've embraced the term literary fiction as not a perfect descriptor of my books, but probably better than any of the other terms that are out there in the publishing industry right now.
Yeah, it can be tough to fit a genre sometimes, especially when many things are involved with the work. I totally understand. Yeah.
One of my fans who's read all my books gave me what I think was one of the best compliments. She said, "Well, Gregory kind of made his own genre."
Yeah,
nice.
That is a compliment. It's
yeah.
Good. I noticed that that your books are all written from women's perspectives, and of course, I can't say whether there are men's perspectives mixed in, like the first person or third person limited or anything like that. But at least from reading the blurbs and things, it does sound like they're from women's perspectives. So, what makes you write from a woman's perspective so much? Is it that this is the perspective you find easiest to write from? Is it that you think that lends the most to the story?
Both. I would say that it wasn't something that I originally intended that, this is going to be what I do. Several of my unpublished books have been from male perspectives. But I came to the point where I realized I did it well. And I got really, really good feedback, especially from women readers who just said that I really got into the mind of the female characters very well. And so once I realized that it was something I did well, I kind of went with it. And at this point, I would say that it is easier for me. And there are some male perspectives. A Season of Lights is sort of a dual point of view. The female character is in first person, and she's probably 75% of the text is in her point of view, and then probably 25, maybe 30% of the text is in the male character's point of view. So, I don't shy away from a male point of view, but I do like that perspective. I also feel like there's, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but there's something in it that I like writing from the underdog perspective. And so, especially in the historical novel, the female point of view is the less told story. Same with the Latin American immigrant. The female perspective is the one you hear less often. Not as much true in the latest novel about the ballet dancer, because in that case, a male ballet dancer would be the less told story. But getting into the mind of somebody who has a situation where society is they're a little bit fighting against the norm is attractive as an author. So I think that also draws me to the female perspective. So it's a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in a historical perspective, the
Yeah.
woman's perspective is absolutely going to be the toughest, toughest story you can tell. Sure.
And one of the things, just following on from that, Gregory, we nowadays we sometimes hear the sort of opinion that men shouldn't write from a female perspective. Obviously, you've done that 3 times now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering how would you respond to something like that?
Well, I would say, first of all, the only people who have ever said that to me are people who haven't read my books. And so, I would say read it first.
Mm.
And the fact, and it's also usually been men. Whereas women, especially women who have read my books, have loved them. And I think that, so as an author, the second part of that answer, great question, by the way. The second part of that answer is that as an author, you always need to write from perspectives that are different from you. Because if you don't, your books are going to be boring. Everybody's going to be you. The good guy's going to be you. The bad guy's going to be you. The man's going to be you. The woman's going to be you. You have to be able to get into the head of another person. And so if that's another gender, that's one way to do it. The secondary character in A Season of Lights is a black man. So I had to get into the head of somebody who's a different race from me. There's many gay characters in the book. So, and I'm straight, so a different sexual orientation than me. In all of these cases, you have to have, I think it comes from empathy. You have to have enough empathy for other people to put yourself into their shoes, into their experience, to write them authentically. Then also you have to be humble enough to have people read your book who are going to give a more authentic perspective. And for A Season of Lights, and especially, that was extremely helpful. One of the not one of the two main characters, but one of the secondary but prominent characters is a gay ballet teacher in the 1980s. So I was not in New York in the 1980s. I was there more recently. And that was a perspective that I gave the novel to someone I know who was working, a gay man who was working in New York City in the ballet business in the 1980s. And to get his authentic perspective, especially on the outbreak of AIDS and the fear that just the emotions that involved as somebody in the gay community at that time, was an invaluable perspective for this novel. And so I think that it's very important to have other people read your book before you publish it. And I've done that with all my novels.
It's great advice. Excellent advice.
Yeah.
We have a question from Hillary. She says, you mentioned that you started writing as a teenager. What advice would you give to teens who want to be writers but perhaps aren't getting much encouragement from parents or teachers?
Good question. The most valuable thing for me of starting to write that early was, when you're a teen, you're a little bit cocky. And so I wrote a 400-page novel when I was 14 because I didn't know that it was supposed to be hard. And so ever since, I have this in my mind. When I start a new project, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to finish this, because I did it before I knew it was supposed to be hard. And for a lot of people who start writing as an adult and they write a chapter or two and they think, oh, I can never finish this novel. So for somebody who's starting as a teen, I would say the best advice I can give is lean into that teen confidence and just do it. Don't worry about it if it's good or not. I mean, honestly, that first novel I wrote, it was terrible. It will never see the light of publication, but it doesn't matter. I did it. So lean into it. And if you aren't getting encouragement from your parents or teachers, lean into that too. Just think, screw them. I'm going to do it anyway. And write your story. And maybe it'll be good. Maybe it won't. Maybe it will lead to something else. I mean, obviously we would all prefer to have that encouragement from parents and teachers. My parents were extremely supportive. But if you don't, just, again, lean into that natural confidence in ourselves that we all have as teenagers, to just think, I don't care if they aren't supporting. I'm going to do this. I don't know if that is the best advice, but that's what comes to mind.
It's a good point. There are so many things that stop us, and especially as adults, we're fully developed and we have learned to be afraid in a way of many things. So it's a great point.
I've got a question for you, and this is a little bit slightly left field. But it's like we kind of touched a little bit briefly earlier about the fact that you're an accomplished tango dancer. And personally, I have to say I'm incredibly jealous because I've wanted to learn tango ever since I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies. And I never learned it. And I've got a bad foot now, so dancing's difficult anyway. But anyway, so, being an accomplished dancer, being an accomplished writer, do you see any kind of similarities between dancing and writing? I mean, apart from using your feet for both?
Absolutely. I think the creative process is just something that crosses in different areas. So it's very different. With writing, you're creating words, you're creating a storyline. With dancing, it's a little bit more abstract, though, that you just kind of feel your way through motion more. Even when you write a choreography, you're first feeling your way through motion and then you're writing it down. So it's a very different art form, but I find that they engage my mind in similar ways. But then again, dancing engages my body in a way that writing doesn't. So dancing gives me something that writing can't supply, which is that physical engagement, as well as the connective engagement with your partner. Because as a partner dance, it's not just moving yourself. You are moving with another human. And that's something that I just absolutely love about it, and which I find very unique about it.
That creative flow. Yeah, absolutely. I expect at some point we'll have a tango something in one of your books. It has to happen.
Yeah. It's just waiting for the right time. But of course, I still wrote the book about dancers. So,
of course.
And there is at least one dance scene in all of my novels. It's a little,
interesting.
Thing I throw in there.
Cool.
Okay, so we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. We can only go around 45 minutes. So thank you very much, Gregory, for joining us tonight.
Absolutely.
It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you and learning something about your writer's journey and the tango. Next week, we'll be talking to Howard Pell, who is the author of 2 retirement books and a novel about rebirth. Howard retired in 2014 from a career in adult education in the computer field. He began writing a blog on his experience with his retirement, primarily for his friends. With encouragement from friends and family, he began writing his first book on things he learned and things he wished he had known before his retirement. Howard has written and self-published 2 non-fiction books, Retire Fit, Fit and Fit, and co-authored and self-published Retire Fit with Safe Workouts. He's written many short stories and poems, and his first novel, Lives Lived, will be released in June. Howard is a writer, videographer, flamenco promoter, so he's kind of like another dancer. We're running with a theme here. A Rotarian and world traveler, and currently lives in Kitchener, Ontario with his wife, Rosemary. So that's next week. So, Christy, what's new in the Christy stratosphere?
Christy stratosphere. Well, I'm going to be releasing the second grimoire. I'm going to start releasing episodes on,
Excellent.
let's see. Well, it's going to be later this week. Thank you. So that'll be on Kindle Vella. And I am still looking at getting out the first grimoire as both a paperback and an ebook that that isn't on Vella, so you can get it anywhere. So it'll be on Kindle. I am going to be changing the name. So if you want to vote on the name of the first book, the series is now going to be called Grimoire Society of Dark Acts. And if you want to vote on the name of the first book, you can go to patreon.com/Christy Stratus and help me out figuring out which name to pick. I have 3 options there, and you can vote and determine the name of my next book, of that book, actually. The next book is going to be called Corrupted Magic, and it's going to start publishing shortly. So I'm really looking forward to that. I did finish episode 8 already, so we've got 8 weeks worth of episodes set. So you'll be able to read them every single week when they come out. So that's my big news for the week.
That's great.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm really pleased with that. Yeah, that's really exciting.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a lot of news on my side of things. I didn't have a very productive week last week due to various appointments and so on, but I'm back in the saddle and pumping lots of words out for the Third Love and Two Feathers book. So that's going well. Hopefully it will be out late this year or maybe early next year, depending how things go. But other than that, I'm just trying to stay cool in this heat wave.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Come visit here in Seattle. It's, upper 70s, a little breeze. It's so nice.
Yeah, it's nice. Jealous. Very jealous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
10,
my family...
10 months of rain and then 2 months of beautiful summer. That's kind of our life here.
Nice. Yeah.
But it's good right now.
I guess you pay for it in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ours is the other way around. It's kind of like 2 months of summer and then the rest is frozen north.
Yeah. And thank you, CJ and Hillary, for your great comments. I couldn't quite figure out how to like your comments on the chat, but I appreciate your interaction. It's great to have you both here.
Yes, thank you to everybody who showed up for the chat. So thanks, everyone. And until next week, look after each other and take care. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.